story of Absalom is one that is fascinating, is intriguing, yet at the same time, it is one of tragedy. It's really sad to see the way the events unfolded in the household of King David. You know, David is considered to be one of the greatest kings that Israel's ever had. He's considered to be one of the greatest kings in the history of all of humanity. He ruled with wisdom, and he ruled with faith. And his military skills were second to none. We're going to talk about that in just a little bit. That was one of the tragic mistakes that Absalom made. I want to begin by asking this simple question this morning. Who is Absalom? There's not a lot that we know about Absalom outside of these few chapters we have under consideration. But we know that Absalom is the third son of King David. We also know that Absalom's grandfather was a king. And in 2 Samuel chapter 3 and verse 3 we read, Absalom, the son of Micaiah, the daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur. That makes him of double royal lineage. And just asking this question, who is he, and recognizing that he is of a double royal lineage, gives us some insight to why this story goes off the tracks and why he has developed the plan in his mind in the way that he has. Not only is he the third of David's children, and not only is his grandfather a king in his own right, he has, because of this, fixed in his mind an expectation that one day he's going to rule. This fuels his great ambition, and it's in his ambition to want to rule just like his father and his grandfather that turns this event in this story into a tragedy. You see, he recognizes that he's not the oldest. He's not the first in the line of succession, but yet he thinks he's the most qualified. There's other things that we know about Absalom that leads him to have this false sense of security and deserving to be where he thinks he should be, but he really doesn't. You see, according to 2 Samuel chapter 14 and verse 25, Absalom is a beautiful specimen of a man. The Bible says, now in all Israel there was no one who was praised as much as Absalom for his good looks. From the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, there was no blemish in him. Now this is kind of key for a couple of reasons. We've all known someone or have been around someone that is a tall, good-looking person. We know that they've been blessed physically with certain features, and because of that, it seems as if things are a little easier for them. People want to be around them. People kind of elevate them. People look to them. And that is the case that we have right here with Absalom. No one was praised as much as Absalom. So the whole time that he's growing up, the time, no doubt, that he reaches his teenage years and in his early adulthood, he begins to captivate the attention. And as the people begin to look at the sons of David, I would dare to say that Absalom was the best looking one, probably the physical specimen that they were looking for. And unfortunately, humanity looks on the outside instead of the inside to choose who's going to lead and direct them. That was the case with King Saul. Remember when they selected Saul to be their king, he was a head taller than everyone else. He was the one that they wanted to lead them on the battlefield. But his heart was not in the right place and things went downhill. Now when God selected David, when they went to select David and look at David, he was not the picture perfect of a boy that would make a strapping king. But yet God was looking on the heart, on the inside. And David is described in the Bible as a man after God's own heart. And so God looks, or is concerned about the inside, but they're all looking on the outside. And no doubt Absalom has an advantage over his two older brothers in this particular case. We also are told in 2 Samuel chapter 14 and verse 26, and again in 18 verse 9, that he has this very thick flowing hair. No doubt it's very long hair. And he cuts it every year. And the Bible goes to great detail to talk about the amount of hair that he had and what way. So why does the Bible take the time to describe the fact that Absalom is a good-looking character with really nice hair? Is there anything to this? Why would God or the Holy Spirit take the time to include these details? Well, the answer to that is, if we look at the cultural context, it gives us a better picture of what's taking place. You see, during this time frame, if someone was a good-looking person, a beautiful person, it was looked at as if God had favored them. God had favored them and given them their beauty or the physical size that they had. Hair was seen in ancient cultures as a source of strength and vitality. And so he's admired. And people are looking to him naturally as a leader. And no doubt this allows him to gain influence over others probably a little easier than what it should have been. Now I want to go back to the story and tell you what's taking place. And if we discuss the story of Absalom, we have to go all the way back to 2 Samuel chapter 13. And it's going to begin with Amnon and Tamar. Now Amnon and Tamar are siblings to Absalom. They're his brother and his sister. And Amnon has this desire to have a relationship with his sister. It's a relationship that he should not have, but it's his desire. That's what he wants. And it drives him to a point of madness, we might say, so much so that they concoct an evil plan, and Tamar is sent to prepare food in his presence. Now, in chapter 13 and verse 6, the Bible says that Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. And when the king came to see him, Amnon said to the king, "Please let Tamar, my sister, come and make a couple of cakes for me in my sight, that I may eat from her hand." Now, a couple of things that need to be pointed out right here. Amnon is the firstborn son of David. He's the oldest. He's the one in line of succession to take over the throne whenever David is gone. And so when he becomes ill, pretends to be ill, David's concerned about him. We're concerned about our children and their well-being, and if they're sick or if something's wrong with them. And so David goes to see him. And Amnon says, "Please, let Tamar, my sister, come and make some cakes in my sight." And so that's what he does. And she comes, she makes cakes. And in essence, he gets her all alone in the bedroom. They kick everyone out. And then he takes advantage of her. And he rapes her. And it's sad enough that he takes advantage of her and he rapes her. But to make it worse, David, who is the father of this young girl, and the father of this boy, and king of Israel, gets angry, yet he refuses to do anything about the situation. He should have done something about it, but he doesn't. Why? Well, I think the answer to that is probably found a little earlier in the story, because David himself commits a pretty grievous sin with Bathsheba. And whenever he does so, instead of acknowledging he was wrong, he tries to cover it up by bringing her husband Uriah home. And when he's unable to get that plan to work like he wants, he sends Uriah with a letter to his deathbed. He's responsible for killing Uriah. Now, he has some problems. We're going to talk about this in about 10 or 15 minutes. We're going to revisit this and look at this concept in a little more detail. Now, Absalom is extremely angry as well. And his heart fills with hatred toward his brother because of what happens. 2 years are going to elapse. And Absalom invites all the king's sons to Baal-Hazor. And in 2 Samuel chapter 13 and verse 24, then Absalom came to the king and said, "Kindly note, your servant has sheep shearers. Please let the king and his servants go with your servant." Now, when I first read this, I really didn't put a lot of stock in it. I didn't think about it in much detail, because all that it says is, "Kindly note, your servant has sheep shearers." Well, he's a prince. He's the son of a king, no doubt. He has a large flock of sheep. Of course he has sheep shearers. He has people to feed and do chores and all kinds of things. I don't doubt any of that at all. But there's something, when we look at the cultural, social context, that's a little bit deeper that's taking place right here. A sheep shearing, once a year they would gather their sheep in from the fields, as they would, a shepherd would guide and lead and direct them throughout the year, and they would shear them. Now, this is a very important social event during this time frame. They made a festival out of it. They had a big to-do. They invited friends and family. It was a lot of work, and they would all get together. The old Chinese proverb says, "Many hands make light work." And so they would get together. They would shear the sheep. Wool was very important. It was a valuable commodity as far as agriculture is concerned. And so when you're harvesting a crop, now this is not a plant crop, but they're harvesting the wool from these sheep, it's a time of rejoicing. It's a time of financial gain. And these events become a very important part of their social construct. And it grew, and it was a time to show your appreciation to friends and family and to rejoice. And they're even known as giving feasts like a king as they had these festivals. And so he tells his father, please let everyone come. I'm going to shear sheep. And they come. Now he tells his servants this. He says, now when we get together and Amnon begins to be filled with wine, and I give the command, I want you to attack him and to kill him. And so, as the evening plays out, Amnon becomes filled with wine. Absalom gives the command. And his men jump up and they attack Amnon and they kill him. And by killing Amnon, we have two things that happen right here. Number one, Absalom finally gets revenge for the fact that he raped his sister 2 years previous. He is a heart filled with hate, and he has not let it go, and he's upset that David refuses to do anything about it, and he finally gets his revenge. But more importantly, and probably plays a greater role in all this than anything, once you begin to analyze the life and the plan of Absalom, is he has greatly altered the line of succession. And what's interesting is when you look up the lineage of David, when you look up the sons that are born, now David had a tremendous number of sons. The second son of David is mentioned, and we know nothing else about him. We don't know what happens. There's a possibility that the second son died. There's a possibility that the second son, if I'm not mistaken off the top of my head, is a son of Abigail, who is a righteous woman. And it very well could be that as Abigail sees all of this playing out between Amnon and Absalom, she gives him the advice that, son, some things just aren't worth it. And politics are not anything you need to get. They're going to get you killed with what's happening. And ultimately, that's what happens to Amnon and Absalom both. They're killed because of politics. Well, whatever the case might be, the second son of David, we know who he is and we know nothing else. And so Absalom greatly alters the line of succession. And after this, he flees from the presence of David for 3 years. Now, after he's gone for 3 years, Joab is insisting that David bring Absalom back to Jerusalem. And so he convinces a woman who dresses as a mourner to go to the king and to speak to the king. And so this woman goes to David and she begins to say, I have a problem. And the problem is I have 2 sons. And my 2 sons got in a quarrel. They got in a fight. And one of them overpowered and killed the other one. And now people are crying for the blood of my son that's left alive because he killed his brother. And I don't want that. He's my son that's left. What should we do about it? And David says, don't worry about it. I'm going to protect your son. Everything will be okay. And notice what she says. In chapter 14 and verse 13, so the woman said, why then have you schemed such a thing against the people of God? For the king speaks this thing as one who is guilty, in that the king does not bring his banished one home again. And so David brings Absalom home. Yet, for some time, he does not extend the royal hand. 2 more years will transpire before David would see Absalom. He isn't treated like a son, he's treated like a stranger. And no doubt during this entire time frame, as he comes back to Jerusalem, he's thinking, I'm going to be accepted, I'm going to be the key prince, I'm going to be the line in succession. And he's treated like a stranger. And his heart undoubtedly fills with hate once again. And this fuels his desire to take the throne, which in his mind is rightfully his because of his father and his grandfather. And so Absalom is going to put this scheme into plan of the seed. Turn, if you will, to 2 Samuel chapter 15, and I want to share with you verses 1 through 6. And we learn quite a bit about the seed of Absalom and what it is that he desires. Beginning in verse 1, after this happened, Absalom provided himself with chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him. Absalom would rise early and stand beside the way of the gate. So it was, whenever anyone who had a lawsuit came to the king for a decision, that Absalom would call to him and say, "What city are you from?" He would say, "Your servant is from such and such a tribe of Israel." And Absalom would say to him, "Look, your case is good and right, and there is no deputy of the king to hear you." Moreover, Absalom would say, "Oh, that I were made a judge in the land, and everyone who has any suit or cause would come to me. Then I would give him justice." And so it was, whenever anyone came near to bow down to him, that he would put out his hand and take him and kiss him. In this manner, Absalom acted toward all Israel who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. Oh, what a word. Absalom shows a remarkable persuasive power over humans. It's as if he had owned and read a copy of Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, 1,000 years before it was ever published. Maybe Dale Carnegie picked up some of his things from Absalom. Notice what he does. He puts on a great show. Horses, chariots, 50 men to run before him. This is not an accident. This is a display of power and wealth and riches and royalty. He is making an impression upon the people as they come to the city gate to see the king. He gets up very early in the morning and he wants to meet those who have issues. He's very sympathetic to all. He's going to agree with everyone's case according to verse 3. You have a problem and you present it. "Oh, if I were made judge, you would have justice. Oh, you are right. That sounds good to me. It's too bad the king won't hear you, because I would make sure that you were taken care of. Justice would prevail," he says in verse 4. He treats people as equal. Here he is, the prince, the son of the great King David, and yet when they begin to bow down before him, he would grab them by the hand and he would kiss them, according to verse 5. He did not treat them as if he were a prince that was higher and loftier than them, but he treated them as if they were his friend with concern. And they were impressed by that. Oh, what deceit that we have. But it goes even farther than that. In essence, by his action, what Absalom is doing is he is accusing his father of failure. He's failing his royal responsibility of promoting justice. In ancient Eastern times and civilization, it fell to the king to promote justice. He was the judge. And people would bring their cases before the king, and the king would decide how to handle every situation. And Absalom, in essence, what he's saying by all that he's doing right here is that his father David is no longer a champion of justice like he was at one time before. He has failed his citizens and his subjects, and he's no longer fit to be king. And he needs to be replaced. And he's showing sympathy toward the people, thus stealing their hearts. The phrase "stole his heart" is kind of an interesting concept. It's only found 2 more times in the Old Testament. Same story, by the way. And it's found in Genesis chapter 31. Jacob stole away unknown to Laban the Syrian, and that he did not tell him what he intended to flee. And then again in verse 26, Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done that you have stolen away unknown to me and carried away my daughters like captives with the sword?" Now when you study the story of Jacob and Laban and the marriage that he has to Laban's daughter and how he was deceived and tricked and all that takes place with the sheep, no doubt he is very frustrated with his father-in-law. And he decides it's time to pack up and leave. And so he backs up and they just leave unknowing. And Laban feels like he's been deceived. And so this is the same concept that we're talking about. Absalom is deceiving the people. Well, then we find very quickly that there's going to be a civil war. Absalom heads to Hebron and declares himself to be king. And he sets the stage to grab the loyalty of the people. In chapter 15 and verse 10, then Absalom sent spies throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, "As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then you will say, 'Absalom reigns in Hebron.'" And so he's setting the stage. You might say almost for a cue, but he doesn't. That's what he's doing. And then in verse 12, then Absalom sent for Ahithophel, the Gileonite, David's counselor, from the city of Gilo, while he offered sacrifices, and the conspiracy grew strong, for the people of Absalom continually increased in number. We don't talk about this part of the story ever. But Ahithophel is a very important man. He's one of, if not the most trusted advisor that King David has. And Absalom has stolen him away from his father. And he's going to provide great wisdom and insight. He knows the inner workings of the throne and the kingdom and politics, and he knows what needs to be done. And not only that, he is going to know the strengths and the weaknesses of David. And he's going to be able to help Absalom. Now, if Absalom would have paid more attention to him and utilized him like he should have, maybe things would have turned out a little bit different. But for a little while, things are trending in Absalom's favor, and people are continuing to get on his side. Now, in verse 13, he says, now a messenger came to David, saying, the hearts of the men of Israel are with Absalom. Absalom shows great disrespect. And word comes back to the king that your son has stolen the hearts of the people, and they're on his side. And taking some bad advice, he even pitches a tent for Absalom on top of the house. And David has fled Jerusalem. He leaves behind 10 concubines. And Absalom goes in. And he goes to his father's concubines by setting the tent on top of the house. They all know what's going on. And he's claiming for himself what is his father's. War breaks out. And Absalom, no doubt, in his youth, is overconfident in his ability. And Absalom probably thinks, everything's trending my direction. It's on the up and up. The people are coming to me. This is all going to be really good. He failed to realize that David is the greatest military leader that's ever lived. And although he might have had the momentum on his side, he had never faced the opposition of a man like David. And in 2 Samuel chapter 18, verse 6 and 7, so the people went out into the field of battle against Israel, and the battle was in the woods of Ephraim, and the people of Israel were overthrown there before the servants of David, and a great slaughter of 20,000 took place there that day. Things didn't work out very well for Absalom. Absalom is leaving the mess that has happened, that he's created from the civil war. And the Bible tells us that his mule rides up under a terebinth tree, and his head is caught in the boughs or the branches of this tree. And his mule just rides out right from under him. And so there he is, hanging from the tree, by his head and his hair all tangled together. Word comes to Joab, and Joab and his men go, and they kill Absalom. And they finally rid David of this thorn in his side. And very briefly, and I'm going to go through this quickly, I'm going to ask the question, what do we learn? What is the application from this tragic story? I think there's a lot of it. And you might say that Absalom symbolically stands to represent someone or anything that is trying to steal your heart. And so we want to have it like this. Absalom is stealing your heart. Someone or something is stealing your heart when you allow hypocrisy in your home, when you hang around the wrong people, when church leaders stick their head in the sand, when there's unreasonable ambition for material things. And I want to conclude by talking about a father's love. So very quickly, let us go through this. David, because of his sin with Bathsheba, I told you we're going to come back to this. Because of his sin with Bathsheba and the killing of her husband Uriah, was confronted by the prophet Nathan. And here's what Nathan has to say. He says, the sword shall never depart from your house, 2 Samuel chapter 12 and verse 10. And in turn, David's family becomes an absolute mess. His son rapes his daughter. The other son turns his heart against the people, invokes a civil war. All of this is a mess. Not only that, when you analyze David and his family, his family keeps getting into one controversy after another. And we want to ask ourselves, why is this the case? Well, I think maybe to a certain degree, David just accepts this. I did something as a king I should not have done. I was wrong, and this is my punishment. David refused to deal with Amnon. David really didn't want to deal with Absalom. Despite all the things that Absalom has done in this entire story we spent the last 25 minutes talking about, David really didn't want to. He didn't want Absalom dead. He didn't want to deal with him. But what about our families and our houses? We're told in Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 4, and you, fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. It's our responsibility. Proverbs 22 verse 16, train up a child in the way he should go. When he is old, he will not depart from it. It's our responsibility to train our children and to teach them about the ways of life and things that are spiritual. Number 2, Absalom is stealing your heart when you hang around the wrong people. Absalom receives bad advice. He has all these people surrounding him, and they give him bad advice, and he makes a bad decision. And when he makes a bad decision, things cannot go his way. He was told to sleep with his father's concubines, humiliating David, to solidify the attempt that he might be able to take the reign. He should have never done that. The Bible is very clear that bad company ruins good morals, according to the Legacy Standard Bible. We're told earlier in chapter 5 and verse 6 that a little leaven leavens the whole lump. As they're talking about a situation with a man in a relationship he should not have been in, and they were doing nothing about it. You allow one guy to do something, you allow a little bit of sin in your congregation, it's going to leaven everything. They were allowing a situation where a man had his father's wife that even the Gentiles wouldn't allow. How pathetic and sad of a situation that we have. Number 3, Absalom is stealing your heart when church leaders stick their head in the sand and they don't pay attention to what's going on. David wasn't paying attention to what was going on in his family. Absalom had already been successful in stealing the hearts of the people before word comes to David that he had stolen the hearts of the people. David was the king, and David was a father, and David didn't know what was going on. And the same thing happens every once in a while with church leaders. We have church leaders who don't want to know what's going on in the religious world. They don't want to know what's going on in the brotherhood, and so they stick their head in the sand. And when they stick their head in the sand, problems just get worse, or they don't want to deal with something, and problems get worse. I'm going to go on a soapbox for just a couple of minutes right here and explain to you some things that are going on that needs a little bit of time and attention. We're living in an age of YouTube, podcasts, and artificial intelligence. We're living in an age where we have people who are congregational teachers and even those who are preachers that are causing more false doctrine and more controversy than what we've had in my entire lifetime. Now, I knew this happened several years ago, and it seems like every generation there's a group of rebels that arise and they get off of the path somewhere. They're no longer on the straight and narrow, and they begin to pervert the truth, and they can teach things they shouldn't, and they draw away congregations off into left field somewhere. But here's what's happening. We as church leaders aren't always paying attention. And did you know that the majority of people who are getting prepared to teach a church today are utilizing modern resources? Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not against modern resources. But we have had men in our brotherhood that have gone to Google and they typed in sermons and hit the print button, and without even reading them and thinking about what they might be, have stood in the pulpit on Sunday morning and read those sermons that they did not study and did not prepare to their congregation, and in the midst of that, as they were reading it, taught false doctrine and didn't even know it. Some of them, after they said it, after the fact, in the middle of their sermon, realized that they just read something to the congregation that did not align with the Bible. So, that's not what I meant. All because they weren't serious about taking the time to prepare to study the Word of God and teach the congregation like they should. Do you know that we have men, preachers, who are allowing AI to write all their sermons? Just go in and type into AI what you want, and next thing you know, it spits it out, you print it off, and there it is. Why study the Bible when the computer can do it for you? Well, I'll tell you why you study the Bible. Because the computer's not always right. And artificial intelligence, as great as it is, and as much help as it can be, please don't get me wrong, it can be a great help. Discernment must be used. It must be used. Because it's not always right. I'm going to give you an example. A year ago, 2 summers ago now, I was having a lot of problems with my hay mower. and I'd had 2 or 3 different mechanics come work on it, and it would not cut very good, and I thought the motor was just completely wore out, and I didn't know what I was going to do, and it just looked like we were missing half the blades when you ran it through the field. And so I got on YouTube, and I began to watch YouTube on how to fix my mower. And I thought, well, if these mechanics can't get it fixed, I'm not much of a mechanic. I can do it if I set my mind to it, but that's not my forte. I'm not efficient at it. I don't like to do it. And so I watched YouTube on how to change out the shear hubs and how to put my mower back together. And so I got out my impact, and I got to work, and I watched the video several times. I put it all back together, and guess what? I think the mechanic's working on it right before me watched the same video, because I had the same result. Finally, I threw my arms up in the air, and I called John Deere, and I said, please send someone to the farm. I cannot figure this out. And you know what happened? When the John Deere technician who was trained to work on that came and looked at it, we folded back the lid of that, and he said, oh, well, first of all, you've got blades on backwards, and second of all, it's all about time. Who put these shear hubs in? And I said, well, I did. And he said, did you time them? And I said, what do you mean? And he said, there's timing marks on this stuff. You know what? That YouTube video never said anything about the directions of blades and timing marks. And when we took it all apart, and we lined it all up, and we put it back together the way it was supposed to be back together, it mowed like a new mower. AI and YouTube didn't know that. Now, did we get the mower back together? Yes. But was it correct? No. Can AI help you? Yes. But all it can do is pull from the information that is available to it. And I don't know if you've noticed, there's a lot of bad information on the internet. I tell people all the time, stop going to Facebook for a fishing report. Because they don't know what they're doing, or they're lying to you. Get it from the right source, and somewhere that you trust. The same is true of reading, studying the Bible. Can we utilize these tools to help look up things? Absolutely. Yes, we can. Is there any difference between me pulling a book off my shelf that's 100 years old to read about sheep shearing versus Googling that? Probably not, as long as the sources are vetted and they're solid, good sources telling us the truth. Discernment must be used. Jesus says in Matthew 7:15, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravenous wolves. I'm tired of dealing with false doctrine from a group of people who are promoting false teaching out of ignorance. And every time you tell them why they're wrong, they go to AI and type it in there so that ChatGPT can give them the argument to argue with you instead of accepting what is true and what is right. Peter says there were false prophets among the people, even as there will be false teachers among you who will secretly bring in destructive heresy. Number 4, Absalom stealing your heart when you have an ambition for material things. That is an unreasonable ambition. Absalom allowed his desire for the throne that he thought was rightfully his. He had the looks, he had the character, he had the personality, he had the royal lineage. He had the riches and the power, he had everything to go with it. And he allowed all that to overshadow him doing the right thing. Paul will say in 1 Timothy 6:10, where the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. It's not money that's the problem. It's the desire, the greed, and the gain of, and it's neglecting your responsibilities that's the problem. Dishonest scales are an abomination to the Lord. Treat people fairly. Don't take advantage of them. Do the right thing. Finally, I want to get to this point right here. Talk about a father's love. Despite how inappropriate Absalom was, despite all the heartache and the grief and the deceit and the lies, David still loved him. David still loved him. And when word came to David that Absalom had died, listen very carefully to what we find. The king was deeply moved. And he went to the chamber over the gate and wept. And as he went, he said thus, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died in your place. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son." Despite all that he'd done, David would have rather have died instead of Absalom. And despite how self-centered we are, and how we betray our Father, and we do things against His will, He is still there, and He still loves us. He wants you to come back. If you're astray from the Father this morning, would you be willing to come back? Is there someone or something still in your heart? Would you come back to the loving Father and make a confession and allow us to pray with you before you? Maybe you've never been put in that relationship with the Father. Would you be willing to be obedient to Him through the form of baptism, to obey the gospel based upon your faith, your willingness to repent and change your life, confess His name, and then we'll assist you in that watery grave of baptism with the remission of sins, as it's taught in Acts chapter 2 and verse 38. If there's one of you, they're glad. Always.